Hello and welcome to another episode of District of Sports. I'm George Gerbo. A reminder to find all of our sports coverage at WashingtonTimes.com/sports, as well as on social media at WashTimesSports. It is NFL Draft Week. The Commanders will be on the clock at number 7 in the first round after a disappointing 2025 season, and no better person to discuss where the Commanders are headed with their draft than my colleague, our Commanders reporter, our jack of all trades reporter on the sports desk, Liam Griffin. Liam, it's good to see you.
Yeah, it's a good time of year. It's a fun time. Anything is possible, so I'm excited to be here.
Anything is possible. It's a good way to phrase it here. The Commanders, number 7 overall. We've seen their needs kind of break down, at least in the early rounds of the draft. Washington has 6 picks in this draft, and that's something we'll touch on here in a little bit. But specifically for their first round choice at number 7, Liam, you've kind of got 2 schools of thought. Is it a wide receiver to complement Terry McLaurin on the other side, or is it somebody more defensive-minded in the second level, or an edge rusher type of hybrid edge rusher linebacker type of person? Could be a high likelihood, as this team likes to do, of being an Ohio State Buckeye. On the wide receiver side, it could be Carnell Tate, who is 4 different Buckeyes that could be picked in the top 10. That shows you how good Ohio State, the caliber of Ohio State's roster is. But to slot alongside McLaurin, Jordan Tyson, who's had some injury issues, wide receiver at Arizona State's another person that's been named. And then when we look on the defensive side, there's Sonny Styles, linebacker, who probably behind David Bailey, could argue is one of the, electric kind of hybrid positions from the linebacking core in this draft. Ruben Bain, defensive end for Miami, another name that's been mentioned. The Commanders had all these players in recently, Liam. It's kind of a, just get to know the team thing. This process has changed in the past couple of years. It was funny to watch, as you've reported about, Commanders having people in for Topgolf, as many as 30 different prospects. And it's just kind of a, get to know you get to know us type of thing, and maybe build some relationships that way you might not have already had with these players. But in this breakdown, offensive, specifically wide receiver, and then on the defensive side and the linebacking core, your hunch, your inkling on where Washington is going is where?
Yeah, so I want to start with the Topgolf angle because it's so funny to me, and I want to know how much of a market impact the Washington Commanders have single-handedly had on Topgolf's brand awareness, because it's their yearly thing now. There's a Topgolf set up near where their facility is in Ashburn, so they're just we'll hang out, we'll see how you guys interact with each other, how you interact with us. It makes it seem low stake, even though it very much is not. But this front office is really interesting in the way they do business over the past 3 years, and that they are pretty tight-lipped. And we don't hear a lot of rumblings from directly within the front office about what they might do, where they might go. And so we're kind of left piecing together clues based on the kind of players they've been attracted to in the past in these first rounds, and what they've done in free agency, and the kinds of builds and styles that they're kind of drawn to. And for that reason, and with the setup of the draft, I think a defensive player coming to Washington at number 7 seems more likely than not, because it's a really unique draft class in that it is not particularly strong. There's not a ton of blue chip talent, and the really elite prospects that are there are kind of weird. They're kind of funky guys who maybe wouldn't be home run top 5 picks in other drafts. When you look at Sonny Styles as a linebacker, he's an athletic freak. He seems to do it all. He's great in coverage. He moved from safety to linebacker late in his college career. He tested off the charts at the combine. But before that, there weren't that many rumblings that placed him in the top half of the first round. Mm-hmm. In a similar kind of lens, his Ohio State teammate, Caleb Downs, is kind of reversed. He's been almost unanimously one of the top defensive prospects in this draft. He is, between the shoulder pads, the head on his shoulders is incredible. He is an absolute game changer, but he doesn't test that well. He runs a 4.5 40-yard dash. He doesn't, he's not going to be Sean Taylor in your secondary, forcing fumbles and making interceptions, but it's hard to quantify the big plays that he takes away. And so I think with the talent in this draft, and it being kind of, dealer's choice in what kind of player you like, when we talk to analysts and some agents and scouts, it seems like when you get to the players who are in the second half of the first round the early parts of the third round, it's just based on the flavor of your choice, where some teams may see a wide receiver like Mekhi Lemon from USC as number 16 in the draft, and others might have him as a day 2 pick. And so I think the Commanders can look at the wide receivers available to them, and we'll get to more of the draft capital they have available, where it's, their next pick is number 71 in the third round. There's going to be some interesting athletes at that position, and we'll get to those later. But at the top of the first round, I think what you really want, and Adam Peters said this to us last week in his pre-draft availability, is that you want somebody who is a sure thing, who can help your team now, who you don't have to develop very long, and who's going to be able to help your team in the long run. And so for me, that sounds like some of these defensive prospects who don't have the same question marks that a guy like, Carnell Tate might have in his ability to be a number 1, or a guy like Jordan Tyson and his injury history. And so I think you can kind of start to narrow that down between who is left at number 7. Is it Ruben Bain from Miami? Is it Caleb Downs from Ohio State? Or is it his teammate Sonny Styles? And you've got the New York Giants right in front of you at number 5, and the Cleveland Browns, who are a complete wild card at number 6 and could do anything, including trading back. They have been a popular discussion point of mock trades to the Dallas Cowboys, which would really throw a wrench into things if you're Washington. And so I think they feel comfortable with the way that their draft board has shaken out so far. Adam Peters told us that they've got a handful of guys. They're not, looking for one guy, and if he's not there, they'll trade back. They seem to have their eyes on a few of these players at the top of the draft. To me, it seems like Caleb Downs would just be such a unique fit for new defensive coordinator Durante Jones, who's a very versatile, scheme-diverse guy, and who wants a lot of his defensive players really in the way they read the game, and that's Caleb Downs' superpower. And so that's where my gut goes right now. But my gut, like everybody else's, has shifted day to day throughout this process. So it'll be really interesting what happens when they're on the clock on Thursday night.
The comparison you make about, the surefire talents, it's interesting. There's just a lot of quality guys, but to your point, with no disrespect intended to these, if I separate them into like the top 20 projected picks, or a group of players that would go in the top 20, if we compared them to like past years, maybe they would kind of fall short, right? In some of these. So it's not I don't say that to be negative toward them, but yeah, it's a lot of quality guys. But when you're spending this level of capital and resources and pressure from the fan base, and to get this right, and in this day and age when you can turn it so quickly, as the Commanders did a few years ago with Jaden Daniels, and doing that and getting it to work, Peters and co, in taking this kind of a little more measured approach, if you're a Commanders fan, is probably will give you some comfort, because previous regime was more like, let's swing for the fences, home run type of, go for broke in the draft type of thing. But important to note the additions they've made in the free agency market, Liam, where they've added Odafe Owe and have chosen to let's be active and look for quality guys that can make an impact there. And maybe perhaps, since we are low on draft capital, 6 picks currently, don't have to necessarily have to go for broke in the draft when we can supplement this in the free agency process.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of fans were not impressed with, the way that free agency shook out. They swung and missed on a few of those top targets. No big name wide receiver. Odafe Owe wasn't considered like the top defensive player in the free agency group. But what it did is it opened up their options, where they don't feel the need to chase something that maybe isn't there. So if you don't have a top 10 grade on Ruben Bain, you don't have to pick him just because that's what's there at number 7. And somebody has to rush the passer for this team next year. And ideally, it's not just 36-year-old Von Miller. Like, that's the ideal, where you're able to build this roster based on the best player available without needing to force something that isn't quite there. But at the same time, when we look at this wide receiver core, it's almost a certainty that they're going to bring in somebody at some point between now and training camp to help complement Terry McLaurin on one side and a whole lot of unproven commodities throughout there. But that defense in particular, and the moves they made on defense with Nick Cross at safety, who's a Maryland guy, and Leo Chenal, who is an athletic, just, off the charts testing athlete, and Odafe Owe and Caleb Von Chason on the edge rusher, you start to look at the defense and with a new play caller at the top of it, and you go, okay, we could run into week one with what we have here and feel pretty good. At least maybe you're not, the 2000 Ravens, but you're at least looking for competency, which was not where that defense was last year. But at the same time, if you can get someone who can really help elevate that unit, and looking at Sonny Styles, Caleb Downs, those are guys who can really elevate the people around them because of their unique skill sets. And when you move down, because it's, like I said, the positional value conversation is just so interesting to have this time of year, because throughout the draft, Jeremiah Love at running back is maybe the best overall player. And then Caleb Downs and Sonny Styles at safety and linebacker are not premier positions where teams are really shelling out, as you've seen with like left tackles at the top of the draft or edge rushers. And so I think you can see them going in that direction because they set that foundation of free agency where they don't have to force an edge rusher, like Ketchick Falk from Auburn or Ruben Bain from Miami. They don't have to do that if they're not totally comfortable. Maybe they add another body later on down the line. But that free agency maybe didn't impress as much as fans would have liked to, but it really helped set them up for success in this draft.
And to a point you made earlier, the appetite to move, perhaps 6 picks, as you mentioned, only across the odd numbered rounds for the first initial parts of the draft, rounds 1, 3, and 5, and then 2 in round 6, and then 1 in round 7. Not necessarily a problem. They only drafted 5 guys last year. So if you look at it from the franchise's perspective, they don't necessarily need the cupboard full of 10 to 12 picks like some teams like to do. But it does feel like, with the factors of the caliber of players maybe being a touch lower than in past years, add in, you've got both New York teams as well as the Cowboys, 2 of those are in your division, have 2 picks in the first round. And then you got a handful of teams that don't have picks in the first round: Green Bay, Jacksonville, Atlanta, Indianapolis, Denver, I think as well, all don't have picks that may be looking to get in there. If you're Washington, based on that climate, and to your point that some of these defensive guys, if you are going to lean defensive, you can hit on some of them lower on. Does it interest you in moving down into the 20s to take someone, if that means you can backstop with a team that's got some early second round picks or fourth round picks that you currently don't have?
Yeah, and if it were us media members in the hot seat, who knows what we would do. But looking from the outside, you would love to, you're getting as many lottery tickets as you can because we put a lot of value on those high first round picks. But the NBA or the NFL draft is not a sure thing. No players are, and so you want to get as many shots at it as you can. But at the same time, the Commanders, Adam Peters told us this because Chiefs GM Brett Veach said he's expecting a lot of movement. And the Chiefs obviously are uncharacteristically high in this draft. And so they are, a very unique team in that range in the top 10. But Adam Peters said he's not expecting a lot of movement around that, 7 to 10 to 12 range. And I think part of that is you need a team who's willing to shell out to move their own draft capital and move up. And, it goes both ways where we say, oh, it's not a super top heavy draft. Maybe there's 5 to 10 guys that you really like, but there has to be someone who's willing to move into that spot. And so I don't think if you're a team like, Green Bay or like Jacksonville that is looking to load up for another run, at the same time, you're not trying to leverage your future either for someone unless you're absolutely obsessed with one of these top guys. But what Peters told us, he said, I could see movement happening at the later portions of the first round for teams who maybe they had their eyes on a few people and they didn't fall, moving back, because the cost between, jumping into the first round at 24 versus jumping in when you don't have anything at number 7, that's a really, really steep cost increase, for those contending teams. And for Washington, you do want to pick up that draft capital. But if you see someone on the board who you like and who you think who you really fell in love with at Topgolf and you think could be they call them Commanders because of course they do, because that's the way NFL teams talk, who could really, become a potential franchise cornerstone. It's really hard when you're actually in that seat and you're in charge of making the picks to, maybe look forward and say, this will help us in the future when you're looking at a guy who you think might be a Pro Bowler in Caleb Downs or Sonny Styles. So I think that it might behoove them to move back, but the trade market in that top 10 is really iffy so far, outside of a team like, New York has already made their move and Dallas is being rumored. Adam Peters has said that he's open to making those moves. He's done a couple of trades with the Eagles inside the division already in his, short tenure in Washington, but that's Philadelphia. And that's also with some, lower draft capital. That's with guys like Jahan Dotson and moving in the second and third rounds. Whereas this is Dallas, and that's a number 7 pick. I think that would just be so hard to confront the fans with just as a proposition. So I think we end up seeing them stay at number 7. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up making moves later in the draft. If that's moving up a little bit in the third round to ensure they get the guy they want, or if that's changing that 1 third rounder to be a couple more later in those, mid rounds. I think you could see movement from them, and they're definitely open to it, but it's just so hard to find the right suitor for that number 7 pick.
And places they could fill in these later rounds here with those picks in rounds 5 through 7. Of course, I'll call him the star of the draft, the man known as Bill last year, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt's the number 245 overall, and he comes in, impresses in training camp, made an impact in what was otherwise a disappointing 5-win season for Washington. To your point earlier about sticking safe with defense, there's some good wide receivers I think Washington could hit on here in these later rounds. Elijah Surratt just of course, won a national title with Indiana, came over from James Madison. Zachariah Branch, wide receiver out of Georgia, in the news this week for what I will opinion hat call trumped up charges of blocking a sidewalk in Georgia, where you get kind of, these things that come out right before the draft for people that are draft eligible. So make of that what you will. Let you pass your own judgment on that, listeners. But there are spots for Washington to find some of these guys later on for those later rounds. What, as we wrap up with the Commanders, are the Commanders looking for there? Could you help add at running back again with somebody else in there in the secondary? Could you add somebody? What positions of need and guys you think that could go in these later rounds, as Washington has done a good job converting some of these later round picks into really stars and key players for the franchise in the last couple of seasons?
Yeah, I think wide receiver is the first one for me. I think if they don't end up going Carnell Tate or Jordan Tyson at number 7, I think that when they get to the third round, I think wide receiver is going to be, nothing is a foregone conclusion, but definitely going to be at the top of everybody's mind, because there's a lot of players in that range who have a lot of athletic ability, who look like the kind of players that they've shown interest in the past. You mentioned Zachariah Branch from Georgia, who I believe the official charge was obstructing a sidewalk and then obstructing a law enforcement officer. Again, we'll let people, I don't think that will impact his draft stock. How about that? Yeah. But he is a really dynamic person when you get the ball in his hands. He's someone who took a lot of screens at Georgia, but a lot of those turns into first downs and touchdowns. So he's someone who could also make an impact on special teams as well. And we've seen them drawn to that range and that kind of player in Adam Peters' first 2 drafts, where they took Luke McCaffrey and they took Jalen Lane last year out of Virginia Tech. Those guys who are able to fill multiple roles and maybe take a little bit of coaching and grooming to become, every down NFL wide receivers. But you're going to want to take those shots because you're going to have to make a decision on Luke McCaffrey soon. You're going to have to make that same decision with Jalen Lane a year down the road. And you're preparing for the post Terry McLaurin future as well as he starts to approach, age 30 and beyond. And so I think a wide receiver at number 71, depending on who's available, but there's a lot of guys who are right in that range. Malachi Fields is another one. Bryce Lance, the younger brother of former 49ers quarterback Trey Lance, is another unique, really athletic, deep ball guy. And I think it will really depend on what they want to do, because there are going to be receivers in the third round and beyond who fit that skill set. And it depends on your offensive coordinator's vision. And so with David Blau, we're going to see in real time what kind of receivers he seems drawn to, because Jalen Lane and Luke McCaffrey may have been a little bit of Cliff Kingsbury's guys with his, air raid light style offense. And David Blau is going to be mirroring a bit more what Ben Johnson has done in Detroit and now in Chicago. So I think wide receiver is going to be a very hot topic for them when it gets to the third round. Later on, you can never have too many linebackers and safeties. This regime has shown that, and because of that impact they can have on special teams, and because of some of the question marks you have at those positions, where Quan Martin at safety is someone who is going to be on a really kind of do or die year coming into this new regime, this new defensive play caller with Durante Jones. And then at linebacker, we have no idea who's going to be wearing the green dot for them as the signal caller in that huddle. Leo Chenal might be able to take that role. Frankie Louvu could potentially. They're very high on Jordan McGee, who was a draft pick a couple years ago, but nothing is a sure thing there with Bobby Wagner no longer in the building. And so I've gotten really big on Buffalo linebacker Red Murdoch, who is very easy to find when you watch tape because his job is to hit dudes very hard. And there is something about the football lover in me that never gets tired of it. His stats seem like unreplicatable as he leads the NCAA in forced fumbles multiple times. He just keeps doing it. We don't know. It's unclear how he manages to just thump dudes every week, but his athletic testing wasn't there, so he's not going to be a top round player, but he's someone that could be interesting when you're looking at filling that role on your defense. And of course, on special teams, when you get to day 2 and 3 is always going to be a factor. And then my favorite day 2 and day 3 pick, it will depend. I've seen him start to shoot up a little bit, is Navy. Technically, Eli. He's listed as a wide receiver, but Navy
Eli
weapon.
Heidenreich.
Yeah, Eli Heidenreich. Watching that is so interesting. And any creative play caller, which David Blau, from all reports, seems to be, is going to be able to suit him into an offense one way or another, whether that's taking, snaps out of the backfield, whether that's working in the slot. He is a very versatile kind of chess piece. And this team didn't bring Deebo Samuel back this offseason after trading for him last year. But I think he can be a really interesting kind of guy to add to your roster of weapons. So those are some of the guys that I'll be looking out for. And, and there will also be guys that we have never heard of, because that's how those last 2 rounds end up going. Some of them end up making an impact, others won't. But that's what makes this time of year so really interesting, is that you get kind of an insight into the front office and what makes somebody a fit for a given roster.
Yeah, Eli Heidenreich, one of these Danny Woodhead, Julian Edelman type of players. Navy's all-time touchdown receptions leader, got to close out his college career at the Naval Academy with a win over Army in Baltimore, and would be a nice touch if he should be in attendance, which you would hope he will. He's from Mount Lebanon, suburb of Pittsburgh. Draft this week in his hometown in the Steel City would be a nice effort if they could bring him out as one of those later round picks that you'll see sometimes, guys that are in the green room hanging around. So something to watch for there. Speaking of Pittsburgh, Alex Ovechkin got to play 2 of his final 3 regular season games against Pittsburgh as the Capitals wrapped up their season. Were they the last games against Pittsburgh and rival Sidney Crosby of his illustrious NHL career, Liam? As we've gone through this will he, won't he debate in the past couple of weeks, they really accelerated late. Nobody, probably more to Ovechkin's credit, doesn't seem like a guy that wants to trumpet up a long goodbye tour. Anze Kopitar, Kings captain, is retiring after this season, and he's kind of done a nice little, wave and hello and getting honored pretty much since the beginning of the season, so much so that I forgot he was retiring because I heard about it so many months ago. And Ovechkin, this is more come on as a late thing as you look at his, coming to the end of his contract, and he's just he's 40 years old, but still played in every game again this season, all 82 games, 6 times in his career. He's completed a full season, especially with the style and the way he plays the game, how physical he is and how tough he is. Something to behold to see the NHL's leading goal scorer, and was once again the Capitals' leading goal scorer with 32 goals, and nearly bringing them to the brink of the playoffs and almost getting them into the playoffs with a late push. But we're at this kind of unique point, Liam, and your perspective from being there in Columbus, Washington's final regular season game on the road against the Blue Jackets. The back-to-back weekend thing against Pittsburgh, a little quirky. League wouldn't normally do that against two teams, but this Olympic year squished a lot of things and made some of these back-to-back weekend things necessary. So Pittsburgh Stars didn't play against Ovechkin in the game in Pittsburgh, but Pittsburgh honored him with a video and gave him the number one star after the game, and the Capitals win. And then they do play on Sunday at Capital One in DC, and the same thing, it goes out with a tribute video to both stars. And so Crosby had the Penguins wait for a potential handshake line to, kind of with still in the factor that if things had shifted out and the Flyers had lost a couple of games, like they could have been playing in 3 days. Right. And just kind of like this weird, and Ovechkin's like, no, it's okay. So it's nice to see how that relationship between some of the league stars when the league came out of the lockout 2 decades ago, to have this relationship now that they all have. And also Evgeny Malkin, a fellow Russian player, all going to the Hall of Fame someday. But just where do we stand with Ovechkin, and how are the Capitals approaching what would be his 21st season in the league, or perhaps preparing to move on without him in their lineup?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting roller coaster for him, and for everyone who like me is lucky enough to spend like large portions of the spring at the Capitals Iceplex in Arlington. It has been such a fluctuation almost week to week, where if you ask, a lot of the people on the beat, 2 months ago, is he coming? Is he going? A straight 50-50. Nobody knows. He has been very reticent to say anything, and it is like pulling teeth, getting any information out of Alex Ovechkin. Obviously, his teammates don't want to speculate because, he has such renown in that locker room. He is the leader in every single aspect on and off the ice. And so they're deferring to him in all things, retirement related. But in the last couple weeks of the season, it really started to seem like this was kind of going to be it, or at least it appeared that the powers that be within the NHL and within the Capitals organization were acting as though this could be it. They were kind of covering their bases, where, the Capitals gave out greatness rally towels in the final home game. They had the tribute video, and a lot of those final Capitals games, it worked out because they were in that playoff race. But for months they had been pegged for national television, national broadcasts, so that every, ESPN, TNT could open by saying, is this it for Ovechkin? And as we got closer, his answers started to kind of shift from, I'll make a decision this summer, to, well, I hope this isn't it. And that really started after that finale in Columbus. So the home finale against Pittsburgh, he waves off the Penguins, and he's, appears to be physically recoiling from the idea of being in the spotlight for something like this.
TJ Oshie tries in the TNT pregame interview of the Columbus game, who obviously played with Alex for a long time, and just like, hey, like the congratulations, he's like, I'm not going anywhere, and this skates away. Yeah.
Says, what are you going to miss most? And Ovi says, well, you tell me, you're the one who's retired. Like, he has not been talking like someone who this is a foregone conclusion. And to an extent, I believe him when he says that he's going to make a decision in the summer. But every step of the way, we hear more and more like he's going to stick around. So his mother in Russia is out there saying, like, my boy is healthy. He can still play all 82. He deserves it. Let him go again. And then after the Columbus game, that's when we first really start to see where he says, I hope not. That's the quote. He says, we say, is this your last game? He says, I hope not, which the decision is, by all accounts, up to him. The Capitals have an open invitation to him to come back for another season. This was not always a foregone conclusion, with the fact that they traded fellow franchise stalwart John Carlson right ahead of this season's trade deadline. But every step of the way, they said, we're not going to rush his decision. Ideally, we would like to know before free agency, so we know how our money is going to get spent this July and onward. But they are going to have a contract for him to sign ready if he decides that's what he wants to do. And he seems to start really just casually moving towards coming back for one more season. He would be 41 by the time that starts again, which isn't unheard of in the NHL, but the years have not always been easy. And it seems like he's had a gray hair for the past 10 to 15 years, a nice early gray. And has been playing physically. He's not skating as fast as he used to be. The hits are still there. The shots are still coming out at, 95 miles an hour off the stick. But when we did locker room clear out with the Capitals, it was really astounding because Ovechkin is a very friendly and gregarious guy, and he'll joke with media and fellow players in the locker room. But he does not like being the center of attention at this point of his career. He's always going to defer to the team. But he spent about 15 minutes talking with the media, which is the equivalent of like an hour for a different player, and was very open about saying, like, this is probably not the end for me. He's going to see what his body feels like in a couple weeks. He's going to go through his normal routine of finding a sunny beach and spending time with his family. He's got 2 sons, Sergei and Ilya, who are really starting to appreciate. And that was one of the things that we really took away is his sons want him to keep playing too. Like they told him they're not ready for this ride to be over. And so it seems like everyone is putting their fingers on the scale for at least one more Ovechkin season. And he himself said that when he goes into the meeting with the front office, general manager Chris Patrick and vice president of hockey operations Brian McClellan, he's like, yeah, sign me for 2 more years. Like, I'll just give me the deal. We'll make it work. So it seems more and more like he's going to come back for another year. Obviously that could change, but all signs are pointing towards this not being the end. And, age 41 season coming up.
It's what makes his comments at the, leading up to the last week, because to your point, they did change in tone and tenor a little bit in the last week, because he's performing at the same stinking level that, prime Alex Ovechkin, same slapper, the same grittiness, the same longevity in all these games. And if you take him, if you pretend and you operate that he's not coming back, then suddenly there's a large offensive hole in your front six if you're Washington. So I think, but of course, I think it would lead to not necessarily, if he does come back, committing him to is this the season, but this kind of very nice league-wide send off, especially from places that perhaps didn't get a chance to do that earlier this season, because it wasn't a foregone conclusion until we get to the last month, and now it still isn't a foregone conclusion. But I'd be curious, Liam, if you see, to your point, he hates the attention, but I think he might get it in some of these road cities he goes to, especially maybe in Western Canada and other places.
Yeah, and that's why I think it'd be very interesting if, it wouldn't work out as the smartest decision salary cap wise, but if they were to sign him to a 2-year contract, and then kind of that would quiet some of the questions and then allow him to retire unceremoniously at the end of, year 1 of that deal. That would be a really interesting option for them. But I think he's just kind of got to get used to it. I mean, part of his argument there seems to be that the 2024-25 season was so much the Alex Ovechkin show during the Great Chase as he, approached and then passed Wayne Gretzky's all-time regular season goals record. And at the same time, the Capitals were really thriving. Like, they were the top team in the Eastern Conference, and nobody was really talking about that because they were so locked in on the chase itself. And I think he kind of took that personally and really didn't appreciate, the lack of spotlight on some of his teammates, as they had one of the best seasons they've had since the Stanley Cup run. They got into the playoffs, won their first playoff series since that Cup series against Vegas. And so I think he really is just averse to all of that. But if he does come back for another season, regardless of the circumstances surrounding it, whatever that contract says, places like Edmonton and Vancouver are going to give him some kind of tribute video. Players are going to try, probably unsuccessfully, to give him a post-game handshake, and he's going to despise that. He's probably going to try to wave them off again. But at the same time, this is what you get when you are, the league's all-time leading goal scorer. So synonymous with hockey in DC, and, really helped revitalize a league that was in a tough spot when he first came into it.
929 goals and counting, ? We'll find out hopefully sooner rather than later this summer as the Capitals head into their offseason with some choices and decisions to make. Liam, I appreciate the time. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
You can find all of Liam's work at by Liam Griffin on social media. Check out all of our sports coverage at washingtontimes.com/sports and find the District of Sports wherever you get your podcasts. Just search District of Sports in your favorite podcast app. For Liam, I'm George. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.